Last night, U.S. President Donald Trump spoke to members of the military to discuss the U.S.'s future with relations to Afghanistan and the now seemingly unending conflict inside the country. Now, Trump began the speech by referring to the 10 sailors who are reportedly missing after a Navy warship collided with a commercial tanker off the east coast of Singapore. Now, after the opening pleasantries and mentions of the missing sailors, he managed to get down to one interesting remark about how a single injury to an American is an injury to all.
That a wound inflicted upon a single member of our community is a wound inflicted upon us all. When one part of America hurts, we all hurt. And when one citizen suffers an injustice, we all suffer together. Loyalty to our nation demands loyalty to one another. Love for America requires love for all of its people. When we open our hearts to patriotism, there is no room for prejudice, no place for bigotry, and no tolerance for hate.
Now, his words seem rather hollow, in the light of recent events where a neo-Nazi recently took to the street and murdered someone. Yet, Donald Trump refused to actually condemn the actions of white supremacists specifically. He refused to call the Nazis for the murder that they caused. Instead, he decided to try to play a middle ground and say there was violence on both sides and that everybody needs to come together, kind of bland pleasantry that refuses to call out the actual victimizers in that particular case. And this has been rather something symptomatic of his entire presidency, is not caring about people and siding with essentially white supremacists, for siding with people who victimize other people, for standing with a pure white United States. It's just very strange to have him here say how an offense to one is an offense to all kind of thing, when he clearly very much represents the opposite, and his base represents the opposite as well. Now, I like his little spiel about how when you open up your heart to patriotism, you realize that we're all part of the same thing, and then we're all together in on this. Except, of course, when you acknowledge the people that you're bombing overseas. Somehow they just don't make it into the hearts of Americans, or at the very least into the hearts of individuals like Donald Trump. It's amazing how something that is described as opening up and loving your fellow man is the thing that's used to justify the imperialist invasions of several countries around the world. And that patriotism, which should be more aptly labeled jingoism, it's really interesting to see the real contrast between what he's saying and what actually happens and what he actually does. But, of course, as always, no speech to the military about the war on terror could possibly go without having mentioned 9/11.
Horrors on the scale of September 11th, and nobody can ever forget that, have not been repeated on our shores. But we must acknowledge the reality I am here to talk about tonight, that nearly 16 years after September 11th attacks, after the extraordinary sacrifice of blood and treasure, the American people are weary of war without victory.
Because, of course, Americans are the victims in the whole war on terror. As the U.S. military stomps across the entire globe, murdering millions of people in what is the war on terror, we're supposed to believe that it is the Americans who are somehow the victims in all of this. 9/11, which was used as a justification for the murders of 3 million people in Iraq, in Afghanistan, is supposed to be... It's the permanent American victimhood, like the self-identified victimhood of Americans, that no matter how much they harm other people, somehow they're still the victims. And I love his essentially what he described as the countries being weary of a war without victory. Really, what they're weary of is a war without end. And of course, we're reminded that the war on terrorism is never actually supposed to end. It's meant to be continuous. It's meant to be nonstop as a continual justification for global militancy in the preservation of the American empire. And in a way, we could actually just go right back to the Trotskyist snitch, George Orwell, and talk about his old quote, the war is never meant to be won, it's meant to be continuous, etc., etc. But eventually, after all the posturing, all the pleasantries, he finally got down to what's going to happen with the U.S. role in Afghanistan and what are the plans for the future.
But to prosecute this war, we will learn from history. As a result of our comprehensive review, American strategy in Afghanistan and South Asia will change dramatically in the following ways. A core pillar of our new strategy is a shift from a time-based approach to one based on conditions. I've said it many times how counterproductive it is for the United States to announce in advance the dates we intend to begin or end military options. We will not talk about numbers of troops or our plans for further military activities. Conditions on the ground, not arbitrary timetables, will guide our strategy from now on. America's enemies must never know our plans or believe they can wait us out. I will not say when we are going to attack, but attack we will.
What? In other words, nothing's going to change. This whole idea of there's going to be conditions that have to be met before we leave rather than a timetable is the same thing that was placed under George Bush. It's the same thing that was placed under Obama. They're going to wait until certain conditions are met to leave rather than pursuing a particular timetable. Now, eventually Obama got fed up with the ongoing struggle, the complete inability to actually win the war in Afghanistan, and set some kind of timetable to try to see if they could possibly get some kind of honorable exit. But what's being proposed by Trump is nothing new. This is not something that he came up with. This is not something his military personnel just came up with right now. It's the same kind of thing that's been going on the entire war on terrorism. But Trump has phrased it all as though he's created some kind of new thing, like some kind of new policy, some new kind of tactic. It's very strange. But in the end, Trump did eventually get to the real reason why the war on terror is actually taking place, more specifically, the one in Afghanistan.
Another fundamental pillar of our new strategy is the integration of all instruments of American power, diplomatic, economic, and military, toward a successful outcome.
In other words, what we really see is imperialism. The integration of the military and the economy into the empire of the United States, and one that he said could even contain elements of the Taliban if they decided to play along. Now, that's exactly what he has described here. He has not described the liberation of the country and then it exercising its own self-determination. He's talking about integrating it into the United States. This is imperialism, pure and simple. You turn Afghanistan into a colony, one which serves the capital profits of the United States, and he spells it out quite perfectly right there. Far from this rhetoric about being freedom, peace, democracy, and ending terrorism, which threatens the United States. We have it spelled out so clearly right here. Really, Trump's speech didn't tell us anything that we didn't already know. There was nothing terribly specific in this whole speech. He didn't lay out any real plan. In fact, he quite specifically refused to tell us what his plan was. He said, we are going to attack, but we're not going to tell them when we're going to attack. He set out that it was going to be based on conditions which we have not been made aware of. There's not really any details here, and I believe that's for a reason. We're not supposed to get them, because then we might try in some way to hold him accountable to those conditions which he set down. So this speech is really much like any imperialist occupation. It's very vague, it's got some kind of altruistic gleam to it, but in the end, it's really about nothing more than empire building. And it shows us, again, why the primary contradiction in the world today must be recognized to be imperialism, because the occupations and the wars of the United States will not go away of their own accord. Thank you for watching. If you like this program, then please head over to my Patreon page and set up a monthly donation. It's your donations that keep this program running. Also, if you would like, please rate, comment, subscribe, and share in various social media.